it's been an interesting couple of weeks, hasn't it? We've seen rain in KZN like we haven't seen, I think, since the 1970s, 1980s. And those of us who are 25, 26 will remember when a lot of the roads were washed away in KZN in those days. And what was so funny was the old bridges were left standing, but the roads were washed away. And that's very much what's happened down in the port area of Durban and those surrounding areas, is that whilst the port is still there, that hasn't been damaged. There was a lot of debris, so a lot of trees and rubbish and everything that came down with the rivers was deposited in the bay. So the ships had a problem getting in there, and normal shipping and boats and what have you had a problem, so they had to clear that. But the quays where the ships dock and all of that equipment wasn't damaged. There was a lot of rubbish and debris there. But the biggest problem has been the roads into the port and that surrounding infrastructure where a lot of the goods, when they land at the port, so all we call boxes, but containers, when they land at the port, they get put into stacks, and these stacks are generally built on flat ground. And as you would all know, a lot of the ground close to the port is obviously going to be very close to sea level. So flooding starts happening. The first parts that get flooded are those areas. And you would have seen pictures of some of these containers floating up parts of the N3. Well, it was the N3, but definitely the N4, the M4, the Mike 4, and the Mike 1. And what happened was that we now couldn't get into the port. So you could offload containers off the ships. That wasn't much of a problem. And that has continued. But the problem was getting into the port because the roads were washed away. Bay Road, which is the only road into the port, was damaged. There were a number of bridges that were made unsafe. So really a problem getting into the port. And of course, that was a domino effect. Once we couldn't get into the port, we couldn't take imports and take them out of the port. We couldn't take exports, so fruit or any sort of material into the port so that could be exported. So it really began to congest in very, very quickly. Within the first 12 hours, we really knew we had problems.
Gavin, I believe the port is open now, at least partly, which will also have an effect on the distribution of goods in any way. How will that be handled?
Yeah, Izak, the port has always been open to ships. It's been the land side that's been the problem. So it's partially open. So the first thing that we needed to do was to ensure that we didn't disrupt two critical sets of goods moving in and out of the port. The one set was moving into the port, which was fuel. So fuel gets taken down a little bit further down near the old airport. You've got the whole area where the refineries are. So that's down there. That was a bit of a problem in terms of getting it out. So the ships could offload because there are pipelines, and that goes all the way down to Merebank or wherever those refineries are sitting. But then the problem was getting it by truck out of there because obviously a fair amount of fuel is trucked out. And this was really around the Durban area, the immediate Durban area, and into a little bit of the Natal Midlands, down the south coast, up the north coast, because the roads had been destroyed. So the first thing we had to do was to get fuel out, so it could go to where it needed to go, and we could support a lot of the activities in KZN. The second thing was the fresh produce. So all of our exports, and it was always like this. This sort of disaster hits us at the height of the harvest. So we've got all our citrus and our grapes and what have you from the eastern side of South Africa and Mpumalanga and in Limpopo, all of that coming down for export, and that we needed to get out. And again, it wasn't that the ships weren't able to get to the quay and we couldn't load them. It was getting that, literally, as we always say, that last mile, those last sort of kilometer between the N3 and getting through those roads that had been destroyed, the access roads into the port, getting it in. So we had to then try and get an alternative route. The only alternative route available to us is the so-called Bluff Road. So you would now see that fuel and these perishables are moving on a Bluff Road. Then the third important commodity for us or for the country was the medicines. We have to make sure that they keep flowing. So those are the three that have really been focused on in the last 8 days and have really being kept flowing. We're trying to get the rest of the commodities going, and I would think we're probably going to have about 7 to 14 days before the port gets back to its full capacity in terms of moving in and out.
Talking about roads and alternative routes, how does the rest of the infrastructure look? Because from the pictures that I've seen, a lot of roads is really damaged. Does that affect the route to Johannesburg and the rest of South Africa?
Well, Izak, the N3 itself and the N2 isn't too badly affected. It's really affected close to Durban. So after the EB Klute interchange, I cannot recall what its new name is, but you'll recall as you go out of Durban, there's that N3 interchange, and that's the N2 going south and north, so going down to Port Shepstone, that area, and going north up to Richards Bay. So before that, there's a fair amount of landslides, mudslides onto the road. There's some undercut because the rivers came down in such force that they began to undercut both the embankments and the supports to the bridges. So that's our concern, is that what you can see at face value, so you can see a pothole in a road washed away, there are a number of routes that we can't see what's underneath the road surface or what's happened deeper down in the foundation. So a lot of that assessment is being done. There's been tremendous damage. What the public has seen in terms of 3 or 4 roads around the port isn't the total extent. And that is really what's taking the toll on deliveries and on logistics, is that as we use a road, there starts to be a little bit of subsidence because the road is being used as an alternative. It wasn't actually the road we normally use. It can't take that sort of massive vehicle or weight. So we start to see a bit of subsidence. So there's a lot yet, I think, to be discovered. And then, of course, on the N2, there are 1 or 2 bridges totally washed away in terms of their access. So in other words, the road build up to the bridge. So I think we're in for a couple of months before we get everything back to what it needs to be. The real problem is that we've learned is that there isn't an alternative route into the port. And that is what is now being seriously considered.
Mm-hmm. And given that the port at the best of days is under pressure, this will add immensely to it.
Oh, of course, yes. On any good day, we are moving thousands of containers in and out. And now all of a sudden you've said, all right, and I'll pick a figure. Let's say we move, 2,000 containers a day in and out. We'd now said, oh no, we're only going to move 500 of those because that's all we can and must move at this stage. So we've got a backlog every day, and we're going to have to pick up that backlog. And I think you're going to see that in the next 14 days, the next 2 weeks, there's going to be a fair amount of movement to try and keep whatever's going in and going out going, and then trying to pick up this backlog. And there is a fair amount of backlog. There's definitely no argument about that.
Gavin Kelly, CEO of the Road Freight Association, thank you very much for your time.